Hi friends, welcome to lesson 3 of our project, a window pane drawing in the style of Tiffany, Louis Comfort Tiffany. For this project we have 4 lessons that you need to view in sequence. So if you haven't already seen lessons 1 and 2, do that first, then come back here to lesson 3. Alright, let's review what you're going to need for today's lesson. You need the drawing that you have so far that's on your Bristol board, pencil, grade eraser, this is in case you need to make any changes, and you'll need a set of markers, at least 8. I actually have 2 different sets here because I want to have a variety of colors, but an 8 set is fine. And of course you'll need whatever flower you used as your subject matter for your drawing. But before we can actually put the color on the drawing, we need to do the first step that every good artist does, and that's observe. So we're going to observe by looking carefully at our flower. So let's take a look at the flower. Careful observation is really important, friends. Now if I were to look at this 8-petaled flower, you'll see that it's not one color. It's actually yellow and the edges are orange. In fact, if I look at the petal, say this smaller flower that's younger, towards the button center there's some green. Now take a look at your flowers. Are they all one solid color, or do you see some variations of color in your flowers? If I go with this small budded long flower, it kind of looks just like purple. But I actually can see a lot of pink in it too. Careful observation is the key. Now before you can actually start to use your colors for the marker, we need to go back to something we learned about in Art Class 1, and that's the color wheel. So here's what I'd like you to do. Set aside your drawing and just use blank scrap paper that you have in front of you. And we're actually going to use our markers to make a color wheel. So have your markers handy, and the first thing we're going to do is get our primary colors. And I'm going to arrange them in a triangle, pointing in the caps like this. And so this is really the start of our color wheel. These are our primary colors. It's the basic colors from which every other color is made: yellow, red, and blue. Now I have the primary colors. I'm going to fill in the gaps with the secondary colors, and they should be in your basic set as well. So I'll lay in the orange between the yellow and red, because yellow and red combined make orange. I'll lay in my purple, sometimes called violet, because that's the secondary color made when I combine red with blue. And the last secondary color is green, and that's made when I combine yellow with blue. So is your color wheel complete? Hardly. There are so many colors that you could fill in all that space in between, because God made a beautiful world that's rich and abundant in color. This is just the basics. Have you ever gone to a home improvement store, into the paint section, and seen all those swatches of colors? There are so many to choose from. So the bigger your marker set, the more color options you're going to have. But since we're going to talk about color blending, you can actually get a lot of colors from just these basics from the color wheel. All right, so I'm going to set my markers aside. And let's get started. I want to show you a technique for blending color, because I really want to show you what you can do when you are very able to see multiple colors on a flower. And there's certain techniques you want to use with magic marker. Now, markers are very liquid. It's ink that simply comes out through a felt tip. One of the reasons that we're using Bristol board, it's a heavier piece, kind of like poster board and not regular paper, is because when you use marker on paper, sometimes because of the wetness of the marker, if you color over the same area a few times, it'll actually tear up the fibers of the paper. Has that ever happened to you? Just a standard piece of copy paper? If you color over the same area more than a few times, you're actually starting to tear at the fibers of the paper. So that's why we want to be careful and use something that has some thickness to it, like this Bristol board. So when I go to do this kind of flower that has yellow and orange, I'm going to have both of those colors handy. I'm not going to do all the yellow at one time. I'm going to work one petal at a time because I want to use a technique for marker that's wet on wet. Wet marker color on other wet marker color. So let me show you what I mean. With this one petal here, I'm going to color in yellow, and I can work fairly quickly, get nice even color, and while that marker is still wet, on the edges where I want to show orange, I'm going to blend it in. That looks too stark of a contrast, so I go back with the yellow and I go right over it, and you can see how it pulls up some of that orange to spread it to be a more blended color. Now I know some of you are saying, I don't want to get the tips of my markers dirty. Well, that's why we have our scrap paper. Whenever you're doing a blending technique with marker, use the scrap paper to clean off your marker tip. Simply do a few strokes and your marker tip goes back to its original color. Of course, one of the best things you can do to keep your markers in great shape, friends, is to always keep the caps on tightly. Don't ever lay down your marker without the cap. It'll dry out too quickly. So I can go over this until I get it blended just right. So let me do another one. I'm going to put down some yellow and quickly behind it bring out my orange marker and lay a few lines where I want to have the blending, and then I go back to my yellow, and you can see how I'm dragging some of that orange color in towards the yellow. It's like a yellow-orange shade. And that's how you get color blending. Now I have a dirty marker tip. I simply go to my scrap, do a few quick strokes, and I can clean off my marker. Now what about if you have one of these long stems? Perhaps your flowers have a lot of little tiny petals and you don't see as much color variation. All right, let's try that. I'm going to bring my other drawing over. And there's lots of little tiny shapes. You don't have to worry, my friends, about being very exact at the little tiny shapes, because we're going to go over everywhere where you have a pencil line with a thick black marker to be the lead cames in our drawing. So I see that this is a shade of purple. I don't really have a marker that's exactly that. I am going to use a purple, but I think I'm also going to use this pinkish color. I'll use a combination of these two to be my flowers. Now this is an important tip. Always plan ahead. Make sure you know what colors you're going to be using for your flowers. Now here's the fun part. You don't have to stay with what it really is. You're the artist. If you want to change it and make it violent, red and pink, you go ahead and do that. Perhaps you're not a big fan of yellow and orange. That's fine. You want to make blue flowers, you make blue flowers. But spend some time carefully observing, because you might find that the color they are is lovely just the way they are, and you want to practice blending. Now it's kind of scary to do it on your final paper when you're not really sure. All right, then let's use another piece of Bristol board so it's the same shade of white as our final, and practice before we go on to our drawing. I have small little buds. So I'm going to do small little circular motion to fill in color. That's a little too pink. So I'll take my purple marker and kind of go over it, but I'll leave some gaps where there's some pink showing. I'm making small circular motion. I kind of like that. Let's see what happens if I put more pink on top. Oh, I like that even better. I like that shade. That's why it's important to practice first. Now I know I'm going to put a layer of pink, a layer of purple, and a top layer of pink, and it's just the shade I want. Now I can go to my drawing and do the same thing. Notice I keep both markers in my other hand, and I work quickly because marker is wet, and I want it to stay wet for blending. So I'm only going to do about half of that flower stem. Move to my second color. I'm making small circular motions over this. I can still see that that's wet, And I'm going to go back over with my pink. Are you practicing? Take 2 marker colors. Try on your scrap paper first. Then you can come back. So now I'm ready to move to the bottom half. And you're saying, Miss Pat, you're going outside of your pencil lines. That's okay, friends. Knowing that we're going to be doing thick black marker wherever we had pencil lines, I'm not as concerned with going outside the lines. Back in with my purple in a circular motion over the pink. There we go. And now my final top coat of pink because I want to blend. I'm still making the circular motion. And you can see that looks totally different than our first petal and the way that was blended. Now, how did Tiffany achieve his amazing color blends? You know, he was a master, really brilliant at experimenting with color. In fact, let's take another look at that window we saw earlier, Nicodemus coming by night. Take a look at Jesus' robe in this picture. Look at the shapes of Jesus' robe and how many blended colors there were. It's not flat. In fact, if someone were to ask you, what color is Jesus' robe? How could you answer? Purple? Brown? White? Blue? Well, Tiffany learned what chemicals and metals you needed to add to the molten glass in order to achieve some really amazing colors. And he did a lot of experimentation, kind of like how we have to practice. We might do it with a marker on a piece of scrap paper. He had to do it in a lab that was practically like a chemistry set. So he added gold chloride and it made a very brilliant ruby red. He would add cobalt and it would be an intense deep blue. He would add copper and it would be a very light blue. You might not think of that. Copper is the coin. Our penny is made primarily of copper, and we think of it as being a brownish orange. But when the metal copper is added to molten glass, it makes the glass a beautiful light blue. If he would add iron oxide, then he would get greens and browns. And if he added tin, then it would become white. That's fascinating stuff. And Tiffany experimented sometimes into crazy hours of the night because he wanted his stained glass windows to be like nothing anyone had ever seen. He also experimented with what temperature you should cool the glass. Should it be very hot? Should it cool quickly or slowly? And should you fold the sheets of glass? And this is where he got such amazing variety in his stained glass windows. He was a master. So how are your flowers coming along? Are you starting to color them in? I want to read you something from Scripture while you're coloring in your flowers. It talks about glass. You know, glass is mentioned in the Old Testament in the book of Job. It's pretty incredible because glass does not come naturally. Glass is a handmade item. It comes from cooking at a very, very high temperature, something you and I have seen a lot. Sand. And that's how we get glass. But I often wonder, how did the people in the Old Testament times ever think of burning sand at a high temperature to get it to melt? Who thought of that idea? Really amazing. So if you go to the book of Job, it says, "It cannot be valued with the gold of Ophir, with the precious onyx or the sapphire. Gold and glass cannot equal it, neither shall it be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or crystal. Yes, the price of wisdom is above rubies." Here in the book of Job, they're talking about the wisdom of God, which is the most valuable thing that we can have. And glass is mentioned as something in the same category as gold and jewels. See, glass was pretty rare, not like what we have now. Now we see glass everywhere. We don't think anything about it. Every window we have. We drink from glass every day, walk around and see it everywhere. But back in Bible times, glass was very rare. And so if we look at the wisdom of God as something as precious as gold, as rubies, and as the Old Testament people, Job, thought of glass, then that's something very precious to us indeed. So now you're going to spend some time filling in your flowers. And it is going to take some time, my friends, because I want you to get it just right. So I'm going to come back and work a little bit more on my blossoms up here. And remember, my technique was to do circular motion with one layer of pink, followed quickly by a layer of purple that doesn't go over it entirely. Circular motion, and then back again with another layer of pink. I'm going to stop right here and check my marker. If the tip needs to be cleaned, I simply come to my scrap paper, do a few short strokes, and now the magenta ink is all back into the tip and it's clean again. I can start up here. I hope you take care of your art supplies at home, your drawing supplies and anything else you use, that you're careful with them. We want to be good stewards of what God has given us. That means we take care of items so they don't get ruined. We use and recycle and reuse when we can. Back over with my second layer of pink. And you see how I'm not too worried about going outside of pencil lines because I know we're coming back with a thick black line. Now what about our stems and leaves? Well, we're going to use the same idea of color blending. You're going to take 2 shades of green if you have it. I have 2 shades of green. But supposing you only have 1 green marker. Well, that's okay. Then grab a yellow or a brown or even a blue. Green will be your base color, and you'll use one of the other colors as your blending color. Now, stems are usually long and thin. So how do you color and use markers in something that's such a tight little space? Well, check out your point of your marker. Again, observation is our friend. I can see by looking at this marker that there is a nice sharp point. So I'm not going to press as hard, and I'm going to be careful how I hold my marker, so I'm only using that point and not the chiseled edge. If you're not sure, try it as a test on your scrap paper first. So over here, I can see a long line that's thick if I hold the chiseled edge, or if I turn it in my hand, I can get a very fine line with the point. Good to know for doing my stem. So I'm going to start with this lighter green. This is a thicker stem, so I'll hold the chiseled edge and I'll simply fill in the stem as much as I can. Now, why do you get to see all the lines with marker? Well, it's kind of unavoidable. You are going to see lines in marker drawings. The way you avoid that is to not color over where you just colored. You want to keep the edges tight. This is where you just simply take your time. So now I'm going to do this leaf here, and I'll take my second color and I'm going to actually make a line where the vein was that ran up the center of the leaf. Make some strokes on one side, go back to my original color for blending, and go over the whole leaf again. That gives you variation in color. Flat color can be boring, friends, so I want you to experiment by using multiple colors in one leaf. So you're going to need to do that over your entire drawing. Now, after you're finished with your flower stems and your stem and leaves, then it's time to move on to our background color. Here's where planning is also important. If I have a lot of cool colors in my flower, I want to make sure I have the opposite for contrast, warm colors, for my background. Do you remember the color wheel? Let's go back. If this is our color wheel, we have our primary colors, yellow, red, and blue, and we have our secondary colors, orange, green, and purple. Can you see, can you guess, or do you remember from our last lesson what the warm colors are? These colors here. They remind you of fire, remind you of lava, desert, sunshine. These are your warm colors, yellow, orange, red. And these other three, of course, then are your cool colors, green, blue, and purple. So, if you've decided you're going to use warm colors for your flowers, even though your stems will be green, then I want you to choose cool colors for your background shapes. If you're using cool colors for your flower drawing, this is purple, then I want you to use warm colors for your background shapes. This is how you use contrast to really provide visual punch and interest in your drawing, and it'll really make those flower stems pop. Okay, so you've made your decision, cool colors, warm colors. What's the next step for filling in the background? Well, planning is key. So, for example, this one, I'm going to be using warm colors in my background. I have an awful lot of shapes here, and I want to vary where there's going to be yellow or orange. So, to do my planning, I'm going to use dots, kind of like doing some prep work. Have you ever watched somebody paint in your house, and before they just start rolling on the paint, they have to tape off where you don't want to paint? Perhaps they do what's called cutting in. That's the really fine painting around windows and doors. That's to get ready for when you're doing the final painting. It's part of the planning. Same thing here. I'm going to take my markers and make a dot to help me remember what color I'm going to fill in. So if I'm going to make that one yellow, then this one next to it I want to be orange. And then this one I think I'll also do yellow, and I'm going to go back and forth like this. And let's see, that's orange, and I have my thing there. Then I think I'll do this one yellow and this one orange, like so. So you're putting a dot as a reminder for you of where you're going to put your colors. I want to make sure it's balanced, so I don't have too much yellow on one side and not the other. So I'm kind of doing every other, like so. So that's orange, this is yellow, that's orange, then this is yellow. So you do that now. Put your dots of planning of whether you're using cool colors or warm colors, and you mostly would use 2, but you could use 3, and plan it out. So I'm going to continue that now. Great, and you would go over your entire composition. When you go to actually fill in those shapes, I have some tips and techniques for you so that you can get the best result possible. First of all, it's really important, friends, to have scrap paper underneath your drawing because you're going to be doing marker strokes off the edge and you don't want to dirty up your table. You know, I think of Tiffany when he was doing his windows. He loved to show the play of light that came through those windows. He was very careful about the colors that he put together. Even when he put tin in his glass to make it white, it wasn't a solid white like a wall. It was translucent. It let light through. In fact, let me make sure you understand the difference between transparent and translucent. Regular glass that you look in a window is transparent, like this. You can see through it, like plastic wrap that you'd find in your kitchen. Totally can see through every detail. Another word, though, is translucent, and that means light can come through. You just don't see all the details. And that's kind of like wax paper that you'd find in your kitchen. So if I were to put my hand behind this wax paper, you know that there's a hand behind there. You just can't see all the details. And that was an important characteristic of the windows that Tiffany was making and the lamps. Light had to be able to come through in order for those glorious colors to be seen. So he made sure that things were either transparent or translucent. So now that I have some planning of my dots, and if I had more time I would finish over here, but I want you to finish planning out the little dots that show you the color. Let me show you a technique for how you're going to color with your marker. Magic marker is very wet. We already talked about that. And so there's a phenomenon that happens where it's called marker puddle. If you hold the tip of a marker on the paper in one place too long, The ink comes out of the felt, goes into the paper, and will puddle there. Sometimes it gets blobby and it's just too much. I'm sure you've seen that happen. So you want to make sure that your strokes are not in one place too long, that they're nice and even speed. And if you have something that goes off the edge, you're going to go right off the page. Okay, so let's start up here. I'm going to do orange. And I'm going to use my marker to go around the petal because that is a little trickier. And using the broadest side I can of my marker, you can see how I'm going right off the page. I'm making even strokes that butt right up against each other, so I'm not doing too much overlap, like this, all the way off the page. Now remember, I said you will always see some kind of lines with a marker drawing, but the way that you eliminate that is do not go where you just put marker. Go to where there's blank page and keep your strokes going that way. You can see I'm working fairly quickly. You can outline along that line and go right off the page, and I'm protecting my table with scrap paper. And then it winds up being nice solid color. You can always go back with a very pointy tip and fill in where you see some white. I'm going to do the same thing with yellow. Outline and go around. And you can see how those colors pop against each other, the contrast of warm and cool. Taking my strokes right off the page, protecting my table with scrap paper. I'm going to continue this all the way around my drawing. It's going to take some time, but I wanted to show you some techniques so that you can work on this as an assignment after this DVD is over. I want you to fill in all of the color on your entire drawing, because it will look like this drawing that's up here. Filled in completely with color, not a single bit of white in the whole thing. So spend the time to color in. You'll notice in this one all the warm colors in the background because our subject matter are cool colors. And we'll come back and we'll put in the dark black marker to be our lead cames. So that's your assignment, my friends. Finish up coloring your Tiffany window. It'll take some time. Take a break if your arm gets tired, but spend the time to do it well. And remember, always use scrap paper underneath your final drawing so you don't mark up anything. So I'll see you next time for lesson 4 when we get to finish up our Tiffany window. Bye-bye.